Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Spider-Verse Retrospectives. Although, for the next several videos, Spider-Verse is not going to be our central focus, though I'm still going to be calling these videos the Spider-Verse Retrospectives, as I feel what we will be focusing on is kind of in the same purview as that. No, for the next several videos, we're going to instead be focusing on a different side of things. As we're going to be looking at, as the central focus for this one, is instead of focusing on Spider-Man per se, we're going to be discussing a different character, and if you can't tell who that character is by the title of this video, well, today, let's talk about Venom. Now, I'm sure that 99.9% of the people watching this video know who the hell Venom is, and, well, why wouldn't you? He's probably one of Spider-Man's biggest baddies, and even in these videos, I have mentioned Venom before, and I've really not gone into detail about who he is because just of how well known he is. But because we're essentially entering a new era, so to speak, and because of that 0.1% of you who probably don't know who Venom is, I'll explain his backstory. Basically, Venom is technically two beings. The first is a living pile of alien goo called a symbiote. Basically, the backstory with a symbiote was that it made its first appearance in the original 1980s Secret Wars event. During that storyline, Spider-Man wound up coming across what he thought was a brand new suit, a black costume that when he wore it, essentially made him stronger, faster, better, more improved, and it even came in with built-in web shooters. So, for all intents and purposes, it looked like the suit was just awesome, amazing, spectacular even. So much so that when Secret Wars was over and when Peter went home, he wound up taking the suit with him back to Earth and continued wearing it for his regular Spider-Man duties. However, what Peter didn't know was that at night while he was sleeping, the suit would come alive and wound up essentially taking Peter out for joyrides, taking control of his body, and doing a Spider-Man thing at night while he was snoozing away. And the end result was that during the day, Peter felt exhausted and fatigued, and he didn't know what was going on. As such, as this problem wound up going on, he decided to eventually go to he wound up going to the Baxter Building and Reed Richards to get a scan and figure out what was wrong with him. And well, Reed was able to figure out that his new suit was not actually a suit at all. It was in fact an alien symbiote that was attempting to bond with Peter permanently. And the instant that Peter learned that, he got freaked out and tried to get rid of this thing. Unfortunately for Peter, the symbiote was a tad clingy and did not want to leave Peter, and any attempt on his part to try and get rid of it resulted in it just coming back. Even when Reed Richards hit Peter with a sonic blaster, as the symbiote was weak to loud noises, and even forced it off, it managed to break out and went right back to him. As such, Peter, realizing that this thing was not going to go without a fight, decided to end things on his terms as he wound up swinging to a local church and went right up to their bell and well just took the full blunt of the bell's noise at close range. And the end result, the loud noise managed to force the symbiote off of him. And while this did almost kill Peter, the symbiote did end up saving him, but ultimately their bond was done. Peter essentially abandoned the symbiote, and while, like I said, the symbiote did save Peter's life, well, the symbiote was not happy with Peter at this, and eventually that wound up growing. It felt abandoned, betrayed, and those feelings wound up growing into resentment, and that resentment eventually grew into anger, and from that anger came a desire for revenge on the symbiote's part, which is where the second half of this dynamic duo comes into play. Eddie Brock. Eddie Brock was a disgraced reporter whose career was unintentionally destroyed by Spider-Man when he proved that a story that Eddie had printed was false. As a result of this, Eddie Brock wound up getting depressed and suicidal, and wound up bearing his own grudge against the web-slinger. And seeking guidance, he wound up going to the church the symbiote was hiding in, and the symbiote sensed Eddie Brock's own hatred for Spider-Man as well, and well, it clung on to that, going to Eddie Brock and bonding with him. And well, their combined hatred transformed the pair into one of Spidey's biggest bads. Venom, a creature with all of Spider-Man's powers, but vastly improved because of the nature of the symbiote, and with ultimately the drive for only one thing: to destroy Spider-Man and everything he loved. Now, over the years, Venom's shtick has largely changed because, well, while he may be a darker mirror to Spider-Man, and I admit that's what initially drew me to Venom because I'm a sucker for dark doppelgangers, ultimately, Venom's popularity as a character has grown, and with that popularity, Venom has kind of branched out into different avenues. While for the most part he is typically seen as a villain, especially since no matter his incarnation, he has a vendetta against Spider-Man. Well, with his popularity, he has kind of drifted into the realm of anti-hero territory, especially considering that the beings that make Venom up, well, they feel that they were wronged by Spider-Man. Eddie Brock always felt that he was a victim and doesn't want anyone else to go with that. And likewise, the symbiote felt just a sense of resentment and betrayal from being abandoned by Spider-Man. And as a result, Venom has at times been a villain. At other times, sometimes he's also been an ally. And there have even been a few occasions when Venom and Spider-Man have actually teamed up to face off against a greater threat. Reluctantly, admittedly, but they can put their grudges aside for the greater good at times. However, just as there are many versions of Spider-Man across the multiverse, well, there are also many versions of Venom as well. Not as many as there are Spider-Man, but still quite a few, and many of them all have very unique takes and tales. Hell, even in the main Marvel Universe, the Venom symbiote has not just gone to Eddie Brock. It's actually jumped around to quite a few people, and I'm not going to mention all of them right here, as some of them will be coming up later, but basically, the multitude of Venoms that we could see across the multiverse are all very different and strange, and honestly just as unique as the different Spider-Men of the multiverse. But with that said, another question is raised. What if they were all brought together? And that is a question that one particular writer, Cullen Boone, had asked, and, well, as a result of that, well, we got the central focus for these next videos. Because, ladies and gentlemen, for these next series of videos, we're going to be diving into the second era of these retrospectives, because, like I said at the beginning, I like to divide all these things into eras, as we leave the Spider-Verse behind for a bit and dive headfirst into what I call the Venomverse era, which, like Spider-Verse, Venomverse, well, it had the central idea of bringing together various Venoms from across the multiverse to face off against a central threat. Now, I'm not going to say what the threat is because, unlike with Spider-Verse, this is not a threat that was pre-established prior to the storyline. But it was something that specifically was targeting the Venoms of the multiverse, and as a result, it's what ultimately would force these Venoms to have to work together in order to combat this threat, if just for their survival. Well, the instant I heard that they were going to be doing this event, I was hooked. Again, I loved Spider-Verse, and I loved seeing all the different Spideys I loved seeing all the different Spideys come together, even if the quality of stories can kind of vary, though I didn't hate any of them, so to speak. But at the same time, the idea of having multiple versions of Venom from across the multiverse teaming up together, I thought that was cool too, because like I said, there are just as many unique and varied versions of Venom to be taken advantage of there are just as many unique versions of Venom as there are of Spider-Man. And so, I wanted to see how would happen if you brought them together. What would be the end result? How would they work off of each other? What would be the threat they faced? I wanted to see this, and so, just as I was excited for Spider-Verse, I was excited for Venomverse, and pre-ordered all the trades we could. So, but with that being said, does Venomverse deliver? Does it build on the hype that Spider-Verse made? Does it build on the hype that Spider-Verse set up and expand into a different direction? Well, that's what we're here to find out. As like I said a couple times before already in this video, for the next several videos, our central focus is going to be on Venomverse, not just the initial storyline, but also some lead-in material and follow-ups. There's no tie-ins there's ultimately no tie-ins for Venomverse, which ultimately it's up to you whether that's a blessing or a boon, or whether that's a blessing or a curse. But I'm okay with it. It's less to go through, and unlike with Spider-Verse, since there's no tie-ins, there's no plot points that happen there that are important in the main book. So take what you can get. But of course, like I said, we got lead-in material. So before we get to the main Venomverse storyline proper, we got to look at that lead-in material. And of course, to kick things off, we'll be taking a look at this Edge of Venomverse, because like with Spider-Verse, this Venomverse also had an Edge of miniseries. And like with Edge of Spider-Verse, the Edge of Venomverse miniseries was an anthology book that essentially introduced us to some of the players in the Venomverse storyline, with each issue focusing on an alternate version of Venom, so to speak, that would be taking part in the event. And so, of course, since of course we're going to be looking at Venomverse now, we're going to start with this one. And well, I guess that's really it. But although there is one more thing I should mention. While this book does also contain all 5 issues of the Edge of Venomverse miniseries, it also does contain a 6th issue. That's not part of the initial miniseries, but is part of the lead-in material. It essentially is also it's essentially a one-shot book that focuses on other Venoms in the same vein as the Spider-Verse on the 2-issue Spider-Verse tie-in miniseries. But it's still part of the lead-in, so it's still going to be focused on, especially since it's collected in this trade. So there you go. But of course, does Edge of Venomverse do a good job at drawing you in? Well, let's find out. To kick things off, we'll of course be taking a look at Edge of Venomverse number 1. And well, this is probably something I should mention about the story. A lot of the Venoms that take part in it really have one common gimmick. They're basically realities where the Venom symbiote bonded with someone else, which I'll give my full thoughts on this later. But to summarize, that disappointed me a little, especially since, as I've said, there are quite a few varied versions of Venom from across the multiverse. And yes, that was alliteration, unintentional alliteration, but still alliteration. But either way. So it did kind of disappoint me that the central focus of a lot of these stories was just, what if this character got the symbiote instead of this guy? So I was a little disappointed with that. But with that said, you can still write good stories surrounding that other gimmick, right? Well, let's see. So, of course, that same gimmick also applies to issue 1 of Edge of Venomverse. And well, the Venom that we're going to be focusing on in this story is, well, an X-Men character, specifically a girl named Laura, aka X-23. Now, I'm not a regular reader of X-Men, and I only know cursory stuff about Laura, so apologies if I get some stuff wrong. But from what I can gather, Laura is a clone of Wolverine, a younger female clone, but still a clone, as she has all of his powers and abilities, including his heightened sense of smell, his healing factor, and yes, even his claws. Although instead of having 3 claws instead of having 3 claws on her arms, she instead just has 2 on each arm. Also claws on her feet, so that's kind of cool. But yeah, basically, she was actually created by either the Weapon X or by either the Weapon X agency, the same people who erased Wolverine's memory and gave him the adamantium skeleton, or, as she says in this story, the facility. But either way, she was essentially meant to be a second attempt at getting a Wolverine under their control. But, like Logan before her, Laura wound up rebelling against her creators and went off to go do her own thing, forming her own superhero identity, forming her own relationship with Wolverine, and even at some points in the comics, she actually wound up taking up the mantle of Wolverine when Logan died. Don't worry, he got better. But, yeah, basically, Laura has just as many varied stories as Logan does with the identity of Wolverine. But does she do well with Venom? Well, let's take a look. As in the universe that issue 1 takes place in, we see that Laura is actually in the middle of a breakout attempt. Basically, what's been going on is that Laura has had many run-ins with her creators, so to speak, and every single time she's made an escape attempt. Basically, the facility, as she calls in the story, has tried getting her back through various means. As she says it in her monologue, the first time they talked her into coming back, the second time she got lost, the third time they just shot her, as she put it, and the last time they did this, they wound up gassing her. So this is her 5th escape attempt, and well, she's ready to go down swinging because, well, she would rather die fighting for freedom than live under their control. And well, she really exemplifies that fact because the first few shots of the comic are her in an elevator after she just killed some people, and then after the elevator opens up, she just jumps into a bevy of armed guards and just slices and dices them everywhere she goes, which, yeah, they don't stand a chance, because while they are armed guards and are armed with some very heavy caliber, she's a clone of Wolverine. She's got a healing factor. She's got claws. She's got his viciousness. There is no way they're coming out of this in one piece. And no, they don't. As Laura manages to skewer and cut through everybody until all that's left in her wake are piles of bodies. Unfortunately, though, the facility is smart, and they decide to go with a gas trick again. And so, once they start gassing the area that Laura is, she makes a run for it and runs into a lab for cover. Though sadly, the lab is not vacuum sealed, so the gas starts seeping in a little bit at a time. As such, Laura can hear the guards closing in and calling to her, saying that if she gives herself up now, they'll go easy on her. But Laura is still not willing to go without a fight, and wants to try and still make an escape attempt. As such, she ends up leaning up against what was a glass cell, and basically what she plans to do is, I'm guessing she plans to cut through the cell and hide inside or use that as a getaway. But as she cuts through the cell, well, the little cut she makes manages to free what was inside. And what was inside was the Venom symbiote, which upon realizing that there's finally there's a means for escape, it seeps out and latches onto Laura, and while she initially at first freaks out, the symbiote ends up spreading over her until it finally bonds with her, transforming Laura into a venomized X-23. And well, we don't see what happens next. It's made very clear that Laura very easily skewers the rest of the guards with the help of the symbiote. From there, the comic cuts ahead to, I think, 2 months later. I have to kind of be sure. I have to really clarify. It kind of jumps. Oh, yeah. It jumps to 2 months later, and we end up meeting, and at this point, the story shifts a bit as our focus now goes to a group of 4 kids, whose names are Kaiden, Tatiana, Bobby, and this younger kid that they all call Little Bro, who doesn't say anything but is part of their little group. And basically, they're just street kids, orphans. They were orphans kind of living off the land, just doing their own thing. And what's going on is that they come across an abandoned bank and figure that they could hold up here. After all, nobody comes around here. It's a big place. They could just hunker down here and enjoy themselves. Although some of the kids are a little dubious about being here at all, because they've heard ghost stories about the place, and they think that it's just full of bad mojo, so to speak. They don't use those words, but you get my point. Now, of course, while some of the kids just brush us off and think, oh, that's just superstitious crap, there's nothing wrong going on here, well, they soon find that the bank does indeed have a tenant. Specifically, Laura. And yeah, she's been living here for a good while, and at first, nobody notices her, but they end up seeing her as she ends up yelling out no, because, well, the symbiote isn't exactly happy that it in Laura's hiding place has been intruded on by these kids, and it keeps urging Laura to kill them, to skewer them, to allow it to eat them, and every time Laura's like, no, we're not killing them. At which point the kids see Laura, and they're like, oh, is this your place? Well, nice to meet you, we're so-and-so, and they introduce themselves. But pretty much throughout the whole thing, as the kids keep trying to have a conversation with Laura, she's still arguing with the symbiote and keeps trying to essentially hold onto its leash so that it doesn't go crazy and end up murdering these kids. However, as the kids are seeing this, they're like, "Hey, is something wrong with you? Are you okay?" But eventually, as everything goes along, the conversation is shifted to if she that she lives here. She says yes, and she pretty much says that she thinks the kids need to go, which. Yeah, the kids, feeling already freaked out by the girl talking to herself, decide, yeah, that's the better option. As such, however, as they leave the bank, they end up running into some trouble outside. Specifically, a loan shark that they end up calling Zebra, who the kids apparently owe money to, and Zebra is here to collect. As such, the kids, not wanting to get the shit kicked out of them, end up scattering and running for the hills, although Zebra ends up zeroing in on Bobby, and, well, as Bobby tries pleading for his life, saying, come on, we don't have the money right now, but maybe we could work something out, Zebra's not really wanting to hear it as he sicks some hired muscle on him. Although, before the hired muscle can do anything, he gets skewered. As it turns out, Laura was hearing everything that was going on outside, and, well, she and the Venom symbiote aren't really a big fan of people who abuse others for their amusement. And so, as a result, she wound up suiting up. Laura wound up suiting up, so to speak, and went out and started fighting them. And so the instant Zebra sees the girl with the black gooey skin and sharp teeth, she's like, "What the hell are you?" Before Laura reveals her face and jumps at Zebra, who pulls a gun on her, and in response, she ends up cutting his hand off. However, before she can kill Zebra, Bobby talks her down and says, "No, don't kill him. Don't kill him. You don't need to kill him." Of course, Laura counters with saying he called me because he called her a monster, and Laura counters with that, but Bobby says, "I don't think you're a monster. You just saved my life." So, and Laura, feeling kind of touched by this, well, this actually starts getting to know Bobby, and by extension her friends, who they meet up with later. As a result, Bobby and his friends end up staying in the abandoned bank with Laura, and they and Laura end up forming a sort of friendship. And while Laura doesn't like admitting it, she's happy that she's at least making friends now, though the Venom symbiote keeps telling her that this probably isn't going to last. That, yeah, they don't see her as a monster, that doesn't change the fact that she is, and that unfortunately, while Laura may like where they are right now, people are still going to be hunting for her, so they still need to be on edge. And sure enough, this is proven right, because the comic cuts over to Zebra in the hospital as he's recovering from having his fucking hand cut off, and we see a pair of government agents going to Zebra and questioning him about Laura, and once he does give them confirmation that they want, they end up killing him in the hospital, smothering him with a pillow. After that, the comic cuts to, I think, 2 weeks later. Again, I'm sorry, I have to reconfirm this. Yeah, just weeks later. They don't give an exact time. And we see that Laura and the kids have gotten their own little rapport going on. They're all hanging out, just chatting, shooting the shit. Just basic friend stuff, so to speak. However, in the midst of all this friend stuff, Laura tells them that it's time, and the kids are clearly a bit uncomfortable with what she means by this, but apparently it is something they decided on before, and so they end up leaving the bank and going to the set location. And so once they're there, Laura gives Bobby the go-ahead, and while he clearly looks uncomfortable with what he's about to do, Laura says it's fine, and, well, Bobby decks her right in the face, breaking her nose and causing it to bleed. And as a result, Laura ends up going over to this man who's moving ice cream and just starts going, "Help! Help! I'm hurt! Please help me!" And the guy, of course, is concerned with her and brings her inside the building so that he can treat her wounds. However, yeah, it turns out this is all a ploy, because, well, we already know Laura has a healing factor, while this guy is busy stitching her up, so to speak, the kids end up running in and grabbing, like, whole boxes of ice cream to bring back to the bank so that they can feast. So, they're just doing what they can to survive, so to speak, and Laura's just doing her part to help out. However, in the midst of this heist, the group ends up running into more of the government agents from the facility. And sure enough, it turns out that the government agents did end up looking into these kids, most likely because of what Zebra told them. And so they end up grabbing onto Kaiden as she's running by, and, well, the government agent ends up wanting to ask Kaiden some questions, saying, "Come on, it's like, I want you to answer some questions, and we can do this the easy way or the hard way." And Kaiden soon reveals that she wants to do it the hard way, because you see, in the time that the kids have spent with Laura, she's decided to give them a bit of an edge, because, well, Laura has informed them that she is being hunted by people high in government who want to use her. And she's felt that her friends may need a bit of an edge if that ever happens. And as it turns out, each of the kids now is bonded with a small bit of the symbiote. Not enough to go not to fully suit up, but enough to give them venomized limbs, so to speak, as we see that Kaiden has suited up with her bit of the symbiote to form a venomized mouth, which ends up freaking the agent out something fierce and causes him to crumple up to the ground, with Kaiden standing over him with giving him just kind of threatening him. Unfortunately for the kids, though, this guy was not the only one. Hold on one second. Sorry, I went back to look in the book. But yeah, basically, after all, Kaiden is trying to intimidate and scare this agent, several more armed men come up and start pointing rifles at the kids, especially as the kids start trying to pull Kaiden off of the guy, but she's just kind of rubbing salt in the wound, so to speak. But yeah, it's clear that that the kids are now greatly outnumbered, but thankfully they get a bit of help, because as Laura was sitting there and waiting for the guy to clean her up after her nose healed, she wound up getting the scent of the facility men going after her friends, and so she decided to go screw this to the plan, wound up suiting up with a symbiote, and jumped out and started slicing and dicing more of the men. In the meantime, the kids take this opportunity to retreat back to the bank, and sure enough, but unfortunately, the facility is already grunting in there and starts zeroing in on the kids. And while the kids do their best to try and fend them off, well, they're not doing so well, as despite the fact that they're now all bonded with pieces of the symbiote, they're still a bunch of kids against these highly trained government officers who are armed with rifles. So it's clearly a one-sided battle. And while the kids do their best to fend them off, they're not doing so well. With even Laura expositing through inner monologue that she did tell them that if they ever run, that they should just hide or flee because they don't stand a chance. However, in the midst of all the escaping, the kids Laura and the kids end up continuing running through the bank until they manage to reach the vault, with the facility hot on their heels. And while the kids are able to go into the vault first, with Laura behind them acting as cover, we see the facility has now gotten countermeasures for the Venom symbiote, as they immediately hit her with a flamethrower, which, well, since the symbiotes are also weak to fire, it does manage to burn enough of the symbiote that causes most of it to retreat and severely burn Laura. Thankfully, she's mostly fine because, well, she's a clone of Wolverine, she'll get better. But as the kids lock themselves in the vault, something strange happens. Laura starts feeling off, and the symbiote starts telling her, "We need to be complete. I need the rest of myself back." At which point, the pieces of the symbiote that are bonded to the kids start getting pulled off of them and back to Laura, which even they're like, "What are you doing? We need this. Come on, give back our gift." But Laura's saying, "No, this isn't me. I don't know what's going on." And sure enough, on the outside of the vault, you can hear the facility knocking at the door, so to speak, as they start getting a blowtorch trying to break into it. But in the meantime, Laura just starts freaking out as the symbiote ends up completely covering her again, and she's just convulsing on the ground. And the kids are like, "What's happening? What's going on?" And she's like, "I don't know. I don't know what's happening." And we see that Laura starts vanishing, like just straight up disappearing from the vault. And the kids are just like, "Laura, please don't leave us." But the whole time she's like, "No, I don't want to." It's like, "No, I'm not doing this. I don't want to leave." But unfortunately, nobody has a say in the matter, as unfortunately, Laura disappears from the vault, just as the kids are pleading for help, and it's clear the facility is about to break down the door. But, well, we're not done yet. Because the next panel of the comic, we see where Laura has reappeared, and it's back in the vault. Only it looks slightly more decrepit than usual. And, well, there's nobody there. There's no facility goons, the kids are gone, well, the only person there is Laura, fully suited up back in her fully suited up with the symbiote. And so, as Laura gets her bearings, she quickly goes into attack mode as she unsheathes her claws and threatens whoever is nearby that she doesn't know who they are, but they're going to regret taking her away from her friends. At which point, someone off screen says, "It's time to put your schoolyard fights away. We have a war to win." And the final panel of the comic shows who is talking to her. A venomized version of Captain America. And that's where the comic ends. Okay, so thoughts on this first issue? That's all you have to say. Okay, first off, I should probably mention what I think I like about the book. For starters, it is a cool idea. I do like the idea, the Venom symbiote naturally, whenever it bonds with someone, tends to make them more aggressive, makes them more primal, more angry, and the Venom symbiote likes to typically whisper into the ear whoever it's bonded with and kind of compel them to their darkest urges, as we see with most other people, though it didn't do that with Spider-Man in the comics, but that's not what we're here to talk about. Basically, my point is this: the symbiote is like the little devil on your shoulder, always telling you what not to do and what to do that ultimately is very selfish and threatening. And because of how feral the symbiote can be at times, it can make the decisions that you're compelled towards be very bad decisions. So combine what's already a feral animal with someone who's got those same instincts, in this case X-23, and I think you got a combat, and I think you either have a match made in heaven or hell. And we see that with And we see that in the story because Laura's naturally animalistic attitude, I think, works well when combined with the symbiote, because when you see her all suited up and venomized, it looks legitimately badass. And I'll give credit where it's due. I love the design of her venom mode. It looks enough like Laura, like X-23, so that you can identify it with the claws, with the bits of yellow, even the same Wolverine fins on her head that you can identify her with, but it still has enough love in there that of the original Venom symbiote, as on her chest is still a spider icon that has legs spreading over her body, and but because, well, it's Laura, it's a yellow spider. So again, and of course you got the teeth and the eyes. So again, there's enough identifiable in there so that it's Venom, but you can tell it's also Laura beneath the suit, and thus everything that she's doing is all Laura's own twist on Venom. So it's cool, and I do like that. And I will give credit where it's due. There is a sense of tension with when the facility gets brought into the fray, because it's clear that they are very much high-ranking, and they're the type of people that can make someone disappear if they don't like them, so to speak. And the way we see that, and we see that showcased in the story with the fact that they were able to track down the lead with Zebra, and through that one lead, they were able to zero in on where Laura and the kids were, and, well, use that to their advantage in trying to mount a counter strike in order to capture Laura, and by extension the kids, when they learned that each of them were bonded with a piece of the Venom symbiote. So I do like that, and even the ending of the story has a lot of tension as the kids are trying their best to fend these guys off, and they're failing to the point where now retreat is the only option, and the only place they can run to is a vault. So it really does. So there is some suitable tension in there, and I admit it is kind of cool seeing someone like Laura making friends with these kids and just kind of enjoying herself. But there are still problems with the book. Case in point, it kind of feels like it jumps around quite a bit. Like, I mentioned before how I had to keep talking about, like, during the plot summary, I had to keep talking about how the story kept jumping around kept jumping forward several points. Well, that's a consequence of jumping forward so many times. Laura's relationship with these kids is kind of more of an informed attribute. We're told that she's friends with them, that she's grown close to them, that she cares about them, but by nature of having the story be as quick paced as it is, we don't really have any moments where they get close to one another. Now, that doesn't mean we don't care about these kids. We do. They seem like a nice bunch of kids, and while they do seem to have it rough for the most part, they seem fine, nice, and you don't want anything bad to happen to them at the end of the story. But by that same token, it doesn't really feel like Laura has them as deep. It doesn't really feel like there's deeply their relationship with Laura doesn't feel as deep as it should be. It feels like it's just acquaintances, that they know each other, and Laura is fine with them because they seem nice. But ultimately, whether I can say they're friends or not, they're more just acquaintances. I'm not really going to go to that far, because the kids clearly are wanting to do their best to help out one another. And I will give this the camaraderie we do see between the kids and even Laura when she becomes a part of their group is nice. It does lead to some legitimately nice stuff, and it does feel like typical kid behavior. The scene when they're just chatting in front of the bank before they go to trick the ice cream man and go and trick the ice cream man so they can steal his stuff. That feels like just a conversation that kids would have when they find the bank that Laura is staying in. It does feel like a typical conversation that kids would have. It's a nice little conversation, and it's a nice quaint little conversation that I do legitimately like. The problem, however, is that because of how the story jumps around, it doesn't really have time to settle, so to speak. There's no real quiet. There's not too many quiet moments, and the quiet moments we do get are kind of don't last as long. I don't feel like they last as long as they should, or don't last long enough in order to form a valid connection. When the kids initially run into Laura, we get out of the story is an introduction to the kids, and that is an introduction to the kids. But throughout the whole thing, Laura doesn't really try talking with them. In fact, the whole time she's arguing with the symbiote before telling the kids that they need to leave. And then afterwards, the next time they see her is when Laura saves Bobby from Zebra, and Bobby talks her down from killing Zebra. After that, they're friends now. She talks to them, and we get through inner monologue And we get in through her inner monologue, we get little things about how she's happy that she has friends now, but we don't see her actually talking with them or building that connections or building that connection. It's just they live here now and she's happy to have them here because they don't see her as a monster. But it doesn't feel like it's as earned as it should be. I feel like we could have had at least a little bit more time between Laura and the kids in order to build that rapport and create a connection with them. So I am going to consider that a problem, and and think of it sadly as a cat. And I do think of it that it's something that holds the story back, in my opinion. And another thing that holds the story back is, like with Edge of Spider-Verse #3, it doesn't feel like a complete story. I'm not gonna give it the same flack that I did with with Edge of Spider-Verse #3 with Aaron Aikman, because in the case of Edge of Spider-Verse #3, that was the first and last appearance of the Good Doctor, and yet they acted like this was like he had this long storied history that we should already know about and thus should care about him. But here, this is a pre-established character, so you do have an idea of what she's going through. And the beginning of the story, it does showcase why she is the way she is. She's on the run from a government facility. She's had a hard life, and she's struggling to stay alive because if she does too much to call attention to her, she knows the facility is going to be on her ass. So you can understand why she has the attitude that she does. The problem is that, like with Edge of Spider-Verse #3, it does feel like that the story feels incomplete. And before you say, well, some stories just don't have finales, well, the thing is, we don't see a finale. We don't know if the kids get out of it okay. We don't know if the facility captures them or kills them or just straight up abandons them. It's just we see them get cornered in the vault. Then the pieces of the symbiote that are bonded with the kids go back to Laura before she's pulled away to some other universe. And ultimately, the last we see of the kids is them pleading for help as the facility is burning through the vault door, and then poof, we cut to Laura and wherever she was pulled to. So there's no real finality there. We don't know the fate of the kids. There's not even a disappointing finale. We're just wondering what the hell happened to them. Are they okay? Are they killed? I don't know. Now, based on the context clues, looks like they'll be killed, but we don't know that. There's no finale to the story. It just stops when Laura's pulled away to take part in Venomverse, which I'll admit that does draw my attention, especially when Laura is pulled into the other location and we see the Venomized Captain America there. But otherwise, the main story that the issue is focusing on, no finale. It's just stops, and as a result, it does kind of leave an unsatisfactory taste in my mouth, and it does leave me watching and going, what the hell? Where's the rest of the story? So I am gonna kind of consider that a problem. But I will say this. But ultimately, the story itself is not awful. Like I said, the positives that I mentioned are positive. The writing with the kids does feel natural and does make them feel like kids, especially when Laura does join their group. I love the tension. I love the tension throughout the story as Laura is trying to hide from the facility, and you can see them trying to gain on her. I like Laura's character and the story and how she kind of, in her own relationship with the symbiote, I think is very unique and interesting, and it kind of plays to both of their strengths as the monsters that they are. So I think that that's really cool. The problems for me is that because the story feels like it jumps around too much. As a consequence of that, it doesn't really feel like the characters have as big a connection as they should, and thus the stakes that Laura's fighting for don't feel as strong. And then likewise because of how the story ends with Laura being pulled away to take part in Venomverse, it feels like the story is incomplete, and as a result, it leaves you kind of wanting. And before you say, well, that's how they draw you into the story, well, keep this in mind: the main story doesn't have a finale. It just stops as Laura gets pulled into one. So yes, I'm interested in where that's gonna go, but in terms of the story with Laura in her own universe, nothing. We don't get any resolution on that. So yeah, overall, it's meh to all. It's meh. At most, you can consider it all right, but at least you can consider it kind of meh. The positive, ultimately, it's up to you which one you say. I think the negatives and positives kind of cancel each other out, in my opinion, and as a result, the story does kind of fall flat. It's not awful, it's not awful, not horrible, but it could have been a lot better too. So yeah, for initial first outings, impressions are just kind of middling, so to speak. But yeah, that's really all I can say. So I do hope you at least enjoyed the video. And well, this is just the first issue of the story. There's still plenty more Venoms to look at, and well, the next time we meet, we're going to be the host that we'll be seeing bond with the Venom symbiote is a very unique case, and this is a character that I have been very much looking forward to talking to, and who I feel deserves a lot more attention than she does. So, next time we meet, we're gonna peek into a universe and see what happens when Gwenpool bonds with the symbiote. Till then, I hope you have a good Saturday, and as always, take care.